Welcome, I'm Ruby, and today we're analyzing the grand final game of the Tabletop Simulator Ladder League run through Discord. The warrior across the table from me is Kingsley, aka Tower Number 9. Shout out to him for hosting and running this whole ladder and tournament. It's been a great amount of fun. Shout out to all the players who participated. And if you're watching this and want to play more games, I recommend joining the second iteration of the Ladder League, which is currently live. The channel is on the Flesh and Blood Discord page. Highly recommend. So without further ado, let's get into it. This game is retroactively being analyzed by both myself and I believe Tower Number 9 is going to do his own commentary from his perspective in a separate video. If so, I'll link it in the description below. So we did not commentate on our game live. We were playing on voice like we would a regular game. We both recorded it, and now we're retroactively analyzing. So I'm going to go over a lot of good high-level strategy stuff and components of the game that I'm looking up for in this matchup. So let's start with the sideboarding. Like I said, the deck list will be in the description below the video. I recommend opening that up and following along as I go through the sideboarding. So our first sideboard is take out our 3 Null Rune equipment, take out 3 Spinal Crush. I could see a world where this is actually correct to keep these in. Especially in this matchup versus Tower's version of Warrior. It's very wide, meaning that he's going to be throwing out a lot of attacks and utilizing Go Again, and Spinal Crush directly targets taking away your opponent's ability to have Go Again. The reason I'm not playing it in this matchup is because it costs a lot to set up efficiently, and versus Warrior, especially this Warrior, it's so aggressive that I have to play the highly defensive role until the late game. And Spinal Crush is just, it is a good card. So I could, like I said, I could see someone running it, but I'm not running this matchup because it's too hard for me to pull off reliably without having to take a lot of damage. Next is take out 2 Righteous Cleansing. Similar to Spinal Crush, it's just a very expensive card, and I'm not reliably going to be able to set it up. Next is take out 3 Pummel. Pummel only blocks for 2. I really need cards in this matchup versus Warrior that block for 3 and higher. So I have to take out my 3 Pummels. And similar to the previous 2 cards, Pummel, great card and utilized in Guardian well. But you need to set it up, and sometimes it's just not feasible to do because you're going to have to take a lot of damage usually to keep a certain amount of cards in your hand to be able to pull it off, which I'm not playing that game plan in this matchup. Last sideboard option, take out the Lunging Press. Very similar to Pummel. It blocks for 2. And, don't be afraid to take out a few blues in Guardian in some of your matchups. I'm running a full 40 in my deck list. I take out a total of 3 blues in this, so I'm running a total of 37. That's all good. I'm still having a very high density of blues. I'm running about... So with sideboarding, my deck size in this game was about 63 or 64. I don't remember exactly what it was. And my opponent is playing a 67 card deck. In most matchups, I actually want to go down to 60 or 61. In this matchup, I'm playing a couple more cards because I know in this matchup we're going to fatigue. We're going to the late game. Sometimes the amount of cards in your deck is as important as the amount of cards in your, or is as important as your life total. And that'll become more apparent in the game. So the Warrior player is starting off first. Attacking for 3 with the Dawnblade. I assume he's just trying to have me strip a card from my hand. Like I said, our deck sizes are going to be important throughout the game, so even if you're at attack for 3 and making me block for 3, that's still a good trade. Now he goes for a defense reaction on turn, an offense reaction on turn 1. Dawnblade is now at 7. I consider taking the damage and keeping the unmovable to be able to arsenal next turn. But I actually opt to play it immediately because trading a defense reaction for his offense reaction, that's not the worst place I want to be. And I'm taking no damage. So, but almost any other scenario, I'm only going to be playing unmovables from Arsenal to get the most value out of them. So this turn I could have attacked with Buckling Blow with Dominate, but that would only be for 6. Instead, I go for Disable, attacking for 7, because it would be very easy for my opponent to just block the, if I did Disable, if I did Buckling Blow with Dominate for 6, all my opponent would have to do is block 3 damage with 1 card to prevent the crush effect. Now that I'm throwing out Disable, I'm throwing out 7 damage, and if it does 4 more, I have an effect on him that affects his arsenal. So he's going to have to block with at least 2 cards. And like I said, he blocks with 2 cards. He blocks with Equipment for 3 and Boots for 1. So he's only taking 3, no crush effect. Tunic up. Okay, perfect example. This is a very important lesson in Guardian. How I'm blocking this turn. I'm blocking with the 2 cards in my hand that pitched for 2, and opting to keep the cards in my hand that cost 3 or higher. The reason that I block with the cards that cost 3 or less is because those don't synergize with my weapon. I want to keep the cards that synergize with my weapon, because in the late game, if there's a scenario where maybe I have 2 cards in hand and all I can do is attack with the weapon, if I'm only attacking for 4 instead of 6 because I blocked incorrectly, that could be a game deciding factor. And the Emerging Dominance and the Blessing of Deliverance specifically, they don't cost 3, and I'm probably not going to be able to reliably set them up during the game. So notice here my opponent's pitching order. He has pitched Red Razor Reflex, a Route, a Blue Steelblade Shunt, and a Ironsong Determination. Ironsong Determination plus Route could be a very big turn. I've actually lost a game versus this player with that combination. So always note all the public information. That being your graveyard, your opponent's pitch, banish, how many cards in hand, etc. That's so important in this matchup. And we'll be going over that concept more. Okay, opponent blocks with a offensive reaction, Singing Steelblade. I'm happy to see that gone. It's a good card. Okay, in my hand is purely defensive. None of these cards are going to be highly impactful. Like if I were to want to, for example, if I wanted to try to dish out damage back, I can't. I can only attack with the hammer next turn due to my hand. My hand is filled with 3 auras and a last-ditch effort, which isn't good till the end of the game. So my opponent's attacking for 6. If it hits, he's going to get go again. I overblock here. I'm blocking for 10. I'm blocking for 10 because my opponent still has a card in hand and resources floating. So I'm going to say what I'm doing by that is I'm preventing any value that he can gain. I'm saying, yeah, you have cards in hand and your tunic up, but I'm going to just totally stop your turn, and you're not going to be able to utilize all those cards and even that floating resource he had. If there's a chance that his Dawnblade got damage in and he had go again, then with the 1 resource floating or the tunic available, he would be able to attack with at minimum 3 with the Dawnblade, and I don't even want to give the warrior player a chance in that scenario. So here we're gonna see me make another Surge token, hammer for 6. Hammer comes in for 6 damage. And my opponent blocks 6 damage. I take first blood, take 1 damage from Shunt. And we've this is the third time we've played this matchup, Tower number 9 and I, and we've always had really strong games. I think all of our the 2 games before this went to 1 life, and I won't spoil how this game ends. So I see my opponent pitch 2 reds. He has no Tunic mana up, and he has no cards in hand. So I know that even if this card were to hit, he'd have to use the card he drew off the hit and use his boots to be able to attack again. So I can block for 6 on that turn with full confidence, knowing that I'm okay, or near full confidence. The only card would have been an Iron Song response in Arsenal. Okay, so my opponent blocks my Hammer Swing for 4. He blocks it with the Route, which I'm happy to see blocked with. That's another strong card that could catch me out if I block incorrectly. So in this matchup, you're always, pay attention to, when it comes to Dawnblade, especially pay attention to how many resources your opponent has, what kind of cards they pitched this turn. Like last turn, like I said, he pitched reds, so I knew that he didn't have enough resources to get off something meaningful. And you're going to notice Tunic mana, how many cards in hand. It's just pay attention to that and constantly look through your opponent's graveyard to know what cards you don't have to worry about anymore. So this turn, I'm going to block for 7. Right now I'm flooded on defense reactions. I have 2 defense reactions in hand and 1 in arsenal, so I'm just going to, this is an ideal trade. I want to save those defense reactions for the Dawnblade usually. But I'm just going the damage mitigation. We're going to see my opponent get Enlightened Strike up to 10, and I'm only blocking 7 right now. So if he hits, he's going to not only get in for some damage, but since he has that 1 resource floating, like I'm talking about, pay attention to all these things. It took me a while to see everything moving, all the moving parts. So if I let this Enlightened Strike hit, with that 1 resource floating, that's going to be a Dawnblade swing for 3 minimum. Yeah, Dawnblade's not going to threaten a counter or anything big, but he's just presenting 3 more damage. So even just, I'm just not even going to give him the opportunity to present that damage to me. So we're going to see me overblock for 11. And overblocking for 1, that's not bad value for me. That's decent value. Sometimes overblocking for like 4 or 5, which sometimes you'll see me do in the game, is not worth it. And we'll get there. I'll show that example when we get there. So my opponent blocks with the yellow hit and run. Not the best card for me to see. I know that's card's not. It's just not that high of an impact card for his deck. So good awareness on him to keep the more impactful cards in. So look at this scenario. Like I said, pay attention to the pitch that your opponent is presenting. So in this scenario, even if I block Dawnblade for 3 with 1 card from hand, my opponent is still going to have another action point to play something. Now, what's a card that costs 2 that I should be worried about in this matchup? Command Conquer. I'm really expecting a Command Conquer to come down, which would actually be pretty bad for me because of the 2 sigils in my hand that don't have any defense value. So, but if I don't block here, then with those 2 resources, he's going to be able to block for 4 with his Dawnblade and get value, which I don't want either. So I get a little lucky here. It might have been correct to actually let the first Dawnblade hit through, but my gut feeling was that he didn't have the Command Conquer in hand, and I was correct. So I blocked the Dawnblade for 3, and then I block the Snatch for a total of 5. I block with my gloves for 2, my Crater Fist, and I block with this card in hand for 3, so I block it for 5 total. And then I'm going to gain 6 life and go up to 45 life. So sorry about the editing. I tried to edit this and cut out all the downtime. There's a lot of downtime in our game where we're thinking about decisions for several minutes. So sorry about that edit. All that happened was I blocked his snatch fully with Crater Fist, which now is counter, and then I gained 6 life with Sigil. I did not attack, and now we're resuming. My opponent's attacking for 6, and if it hits, he'll get go again. So this is a scenario. Remember, I talked about overblocking just now. So I'm going to overblock for. I'm overblocking 4 right now. Dawnblade's coming in for 6. My Staunch Response has a defense of 10 right now. So like I said, my opponent had several cards in hand with Tunic up. I wanted to just say, you're not going to get all your value with this turn because I'm just going to stuff your attack. Now, my opponent being a good player, he is able to take advantage of that and play Glit the Quicksilver. Thankfully, I didn't allow for the reprise trigger. Now, this is an interesting block that I want to talk about. Snatch coming out. I actually opt to take this Snatch. I let him draw the card. The reason I let him draw a card, is because I know that card is going to end up in his arsenal, and I have a card that is going to directly attack, put pressure on his arsenal next turn. I'm probably not going to get it, but I'm at least going to strip cards out of his hand, or maybe even some armor blocks. So here we see me make a Surging Strike token and Command Conquer for 6. And like I said, we strip 2 cards out of his hand, pressuring that arsenal. So I'm not going to let him have a strong, full 5-card hand, as they say, next turn. Okay, interesting note about Guardian. Don't be afraid to block with your key cards early on. So I block with the Crippling Crush to prevent some damage, and I block with the Mangle to prevent damage. Those are like the best cards in my deck. That's okay, because I have 2 Remembrance in my deck, and those cards are most impactful in the late game, so I'm fine blocking with them in the early game, and then I'll bring them back, as we'll see in the late game, with Remembrance to get the most value out of them. This turn I could have attacked with Hammer for 6, so always look through your graveyard, and always look through your opponent's graveyard. Here we could have seen me Hammer and for 6, but I instead choose to not pitch the Unmovable and put in my arsenal, and I do that is because I know my opponent's next turn is going to be a strong turn because he has a Quicken token and 4 cards in hand plus an arsenal card. So I have to be prepared to play. You have to plan ahead. I can plan ahead very clearly that I'm gonna have to play the defensive role with this Quicken token out. So we see Flock of the Featherwalkers having go again from the previous Flock of the Featherwalkers, and then creating a new Quicken token. So his next attack after this will have go again. Now, it might have been correct for me to not block here and take the 5 and see what else he has to dish out in case Dawnblade's going to get big, but I have so much defense traction in hand and arsenal that I'm more worried about reducing damage than Dawnblade getting out of control. So thankfully he doesn't try to get over. I block with 6 from arsenal, reducing any potential reprise trigger, and ending his turn. And then swing for 4 with Guardian, strip a card out of his hand, he takes 1 damage. That will add up so significantly over the course of the game. All those times I attack for 4 and 6 and get in a few points of damage. Opponent coming in for 5 with go again. Still concerned, like I said, about you have to be worried about Command Conquer here, possibly Enlightened Strike. Because my opponent's Dawnblade during the course of the game, it doesn't even get that much higher than, I think, even 8 power, where this warrior's damage output comes in is the generic cost cards like the Snatches, Scar for a Scar, Rabble, Command Conquer, and Lightning Strike. So Dawnblade gets up to 8 here, and I'm overblocking it by 2. Thankfully, my opponent doesn't have a follow-up go-wide attack. I could have been caught out because of that. Like if he threw out a Snatch or even a Scar. So here you see me looking at my graveyard, checking how many defense reactions I've used. I think I've used like half of my defense reactions at this point. I run a total of 12, and I think at this point in the game. So here you see me use an early Remembrance, getting back Command Conquer, Mangle, and Crippling Crush. Honestly, that was a bit of a early Remembrance, but if you noticed, the turn before, with this Fate Foreseen that I blocked with last turn, I put a Remembrance from the top of my library on the bottom. So I know that if I were to have not played this Remembrance this turn and pitched it, then I would have been stuck with 2 Remembrances in a row. Now against Warrior, you really don't want Dawnblade or their other on-hit effect cards like Snatch and Command Conquer to get in. So if there's a scenario where I have 2 Remembrance in hand later game when I would draw them again, that could be potentially very bad for me. So I choose to play that Remembrance earlier than usual to make sure that I don't get caught out with 2 in a row. So pitch order is very important playing Guardian. So I block the first Scar for 3 and I take 1 damage, and then Command Conquer, I'm going to block it out fully. I just can't let him have any... I cannot let the defense reactions in my arsenal up. They're so valuable. So I'm going to choose to basically have no turn. So pitch order matters. What you pitch matters, and when you pitch it matters. Look at what I do this turn. I already have a defense reaction in arsenal, and I have another defense reaction in hand. I've already burned through half my defense reactions in my deck total. So I'm going to pitch this card so that I can use it late game. I'm comfortable having my defense reaction arsenal that I can afford to do this, and keep that in. And that's a really strong tip for this matchup. Look at the life totals. I know I'm going to be able to utilize that defense reaction I just pitched later in the game. So attacking for 3 with Go again. I block for 3, and then I believe this is Lightning Strike for 7. Just coming in for a lot of damage. And this is the first turn of the game that you see me start taking a little bit of damage to throw out a strong attack. So I'm going to block for 3 here, take 4 damage, probably the most damage I've taken in a turn so far. And I do that is because I'm going to be able to play this Mangle out for 1 blue. Because it's only going to cost 3 with the token out. Because Wild playing defensive and hitting with Hammer constantly is a strong strategy, I can't do that the whole game. So even though this Mangle is going to get blocked out and not get any on-hit effects, I'm still fine with that trade for taking a couple damage for throwing it out, because I really need to present at least some threats over the game. You can't just play defensive and block the entire game as Guardian. You have to have some large, meaningful turns. So I block there for 5 because, I block the Dawnblade, which is coming in for 5. I block it for 6 with hand. I know that if he's going to try to get over my, get Dawnblade to hit. I have a defense reaction and arsenal. No way that Dawnblade is going to hit this turn, so I can comfortably block from 6 there. And then he just plays an energy potion. Now, I could have used my defense reaction from arsenal instead, because I have a Tome of Fyendal in hand, and this card is tricky sometimes. You don't want to give up your arsenal slot to be able to put the tome in, and I recognize that, well, I'll just use this tome to pitch the Command Conquer, and I'll play the tome next later in the game. And you'll actually see that I had some trouble pulling off the Tome of Fyendal in the game, so it actually could have been correct for me to put it in arsenal this turn. But I know that he's going to have a card in arsenal, and that Command Conquer is going to be a good card against him. Yeah, like I said, I'm never going to get any of these Command Conquerors to connect, and neither does he. But what it's doing, why this card is so good, it's putting pressure on. It's also forcing 2 cards against my 1 card. I spend 1 card to attack, and he spends 2 cards to block out of his deck. In this matchup, your deck size is almost as important as your life total. So Rabble revealing Twinning Blade. Rabble's only coming at me for 3. I'm going to block with Crippling Crush here because if I had a bunch of blues, I might try to take some damage to get off a Crippling Crush this turn, or next turn. But judging by my hand, Crippling Crush is just not going to be powerful in this context. So I'm just going to block with it. Like I said, I have 1 more Remembrance in deck where I'm going to be able to get those Crippling Crushes back late game, no problem. Do not be afraid to block with those early. Dawnblade's coming in for 3 with no go again. So he was just throwing out the damage, which I meet. Take no damage. I'm going to attack for 4 here. I make sure to play the Sigil until after I attack with the hammer, simply for giving my opponent the least amount of information that I can as possible. If, let's say, I play the Sigil before the hammer, then my opponent knows the other card I have in my hand and might block differently. So look at the life total difference. I'm up by 13 life at this point. I'm up by 13 life. Isn't that crazy? Well, Warrior is able to dish out so much damage consistently that that life total difference is not as big as it seems. The Warrior player has also not used up any equipment blocks on his arms and his helm, so take that into account as well when you think about life totals. Whereas I've used 1 of my armor blocks so far. So Rabble's coming at me for 4. You're going to see me block with Stamp Authority because Stamp Authority it's just not relevant versus Warrior. Great card versus Ninja, and it's just not that strong in this matchup. So it's blocking and pitching. That's what the use of that card is for this matchup. This is Scary. He's coming at me for Steelblade Supremacy for 5 with 3 cards in hand. Yep. And that's a correct block by me by not overblocking, and well played by my opponent to utilize that. He gets the Reprise trigger, gets go again, and plays Twinning Blade to attack for 5 again, getting a ton of value out of Steelblade Supremacy paired with the Twinning Blade. Yep, and I have to block for 5 here. Not only would Dawnblade to get a counter, but my opponent would be able to draw another card. My opponent would also have been able to break his boots and attack for a 3rd time. and get Steel Blade Supremacy's buff 3 times in 1 turn. So be very cognizant of when your opponent plays Steel Blade Supremacy. If they are playing Twinning Blade, you have to respect that. So thankfully I blocked totally correctly and was not about to get blown out by a triple Dawnblade attack in 1 turn. Scar for a Scar coming at me for 4. I block 3, take a damage. Again, Showtime, similar to Stamp Authority. In this matchup, it's not going to get played. It's just good for blocking and pitching. Here, I block incorrectly. This is an incorrect block. The reason this is an incorrect block is because so Dawnblade is coming at me for 5 and go again, and I'm blocking for 10 here. I have no cards left in hand. I'm blocking for 10, which is over blocking for 5 defense, and he has another action point to get a free 5 points of damage in. You know, and if he played Enlightened Strike, he would have gotten 7 damage in. So I really got caught out in this scenario. This was an incorrect block. I should have only blocked for 7 with Staunch Response, or possibly used my card in Arsenal to block. So yeah, here I get, I overblock incorrectly and get punished for it. And I say, draw 4, pass. I have no turn. And now I give my opponent a full 4 card plus Arsenal plus a Quicken token. You know, I remember at this point in the game, I think it was this turn where I felt a little out of control on the pace of the game. That cushiony life total lead, I think I was up by 12 life before. Now I'm only up by 6, and I'm giving my opponent this potentially massive turn to come at me with a ton of damage. So blocking is so correct in this game, in this matchup, specifically Warrior Guardian. You can get really punished if you block incorrectly. Snow Snatch is coming in for 4 with Go Again. If this hits, it's going to just replace itself. I really don't want that. So I block for 4 from Arsenal, because even if he tries to Razor Reflex it, he's not getting full value out of Razor Reflex because he already has Go Again. So I'm saying I'm going to block for 4. If you want to get the Snatch on hit trigger, go ahead. That's a fine trade for me. So the Snatches gets blocked out, no damage. Rabble comes in for 3. Interesting to note that 2 out of the 3 Rabbles in this game only attacked for 3, while my opponent's very red heavy deck. So curious to see what would happen if the Rabbles had full value over the game. So I block 3, take no damage from the Rabble. So far blocking correctly. I think this is Enlightened Strike coming at me for 7. So another interesting decision tree point here. So here you see me looking at my opponent's graveyard to see what else I need to worry about. So interesting decision point here, because if I opt to not block the Enlightened Strike, I can come back at my opponent for 8 with Dominate with the Mangle, and threaten breaking his boots, because his boots already have a counter on them, and if Mangle were to come in and hit for 4 or more, I would be able to destroy them. But in that scenario, my opponent would be smart enough to use his equipment to block, to prevent the crush effect. But that'd still be that'd still be an okay trade. I think I go for the extremely defensive and safe route. I block with 2 more cards from hand, and then the next turn I don't even attack. I just put that 1 card in my hand into Arsenal. So interesting decision point. Maybe I could have gone a little more offensive that turn and attacked with the Mangle for Dominate. Instead, I go for what I'm most comfortable and experienced with, which is the very safe and defensive route. And I recommend that you play that route mostly in this matchup. But like I said, you do have to be able to close the game and get in meaningful damage. You have to, you can't play defensive the whole game. So there's that determination plus route combination being pitched again. I really want to just stay cognizant of that, and because it's a possible blowout if I don't have the defense reaction when my opponent draws those cards again. So I block all the damage and come back at for 4. Classic. This really adds up over the course of the game. Attacking for 4 or 6 and getting in chip damage, and stripping cards from your opponent's hand. Like I said, deck size and how many cards left in our decks is almost as important as our life totals, because it dictates so much of the game. Warrior is a class that suffers from the long game because all of its threats get taken out of the deck. And Guardian can play that long game much more efficiently because at the end of the game, your hammer is so much more efficient than their Dawnblade when they don't have all these good cards left in their deck. So this is my opponent's third Red Warrior's Valor, which is relieving for me to see. It's just a card that creates a lot of pseudo pressure. It's an if it hits effect. So you're going to see me deciding how to block correctly, not wanting to let Dawnblade hit. I look at all the offensive reactions in my opponent's graveyard to deduct how many other defensive reactions I have to play around for the remainder of the game. So block for 6, and like we expected, an offensive reaction getting Dawnblade up to 9, and then attacking for 4. And I am scared that there's either another offensive reaction in his arsenal that he could pay for with the Tunic. And I believe I block for 4 here. And we see my opponent use a Razor Reflex. So very interesting choice of me here to not use my defense reaction arsenal. I'm letting Dawnblade get a counter this turn. Now my thought process behind this was that, I'm not going to overcommit and use my defense reaction, my arsenal. Sure, I'll take 3 damage right here, but and Dawnblade will get a counter. But I know that I can contain it next turn with the defense reaction, my arsenal. I'm not worried. I can keep Dawnblade in control. I'm happy that my opponent used the Razor Reflex out of arsenal, so I don't have to worry about it going forward, and I keep my defense reaction in arsenal. So, lose the battle. I lost the turn, but I'm not losing the war. I'm playing for the long game here. This is another interesting block. I block for 7 using a very valuable equipment block. The reason I do that is if I just block with the Unmovable from Arsenal, it's blocking for 6, and it's blocking a Dawnblade, which has 4 power. Now, Warrior's attack reactions go in increments of 3, sometimes 4 if you're thinking about singing Steelblade. But generally, I'm thinking about Dawnblade getting a +3 boost. So if I'm only blocking with the Unmovable from Arsenal, I am exposing myself to the risk of Dawnblade getting +3 power attack and getting up to 7, where I'd only be blocking 6 from the Immovable. That's why I use the equipment piece to get that 7th point. It turns out to be the incorrect block here. Like I said, I'm going the safe defensive route for most of my decisions. It turns out that this was the incorrect block here, but even though it's the incorrect block, I still ensure that Dawnblade's counter gets removed. I can't let my opponent have that for more than, you know, maybe if he was able to get over it somehow this turn, it's not the end of the world. But more than 2 turns, I consider that Dawnblade getting a little bit running away with the game. Yep, and here you're going to see me attack for 4 with Hammer. I'm going to use my Remembrance to get those 3 Crippling Crush back. And put a Defense Reaction in Arsenal. So, like I said, deck size, so important in this game. I have 9 cards left in my deck right now. Are you kidding me? With this Remembrance, thankfully that's going to get me up to like 12 or maybe 11 subtracting. Yeah, I think 12. But we are like really close to fatiguing here. And look at the life totals. You know, I'm not that ahead on life. Warrior still has a decent amount of strong, impactful red cards left in their deck. So I'm honestly really worried at this point that I possibly have been playing too defensively, judging by how low our deck sizes are. But I am still in the life total lead. And look at my hand. I have a great Crippling Crush hand from shuffling those 3 back with such a small deck. And, you know, just the timing of the game, I get so unlucky by this Command Conquer here. Because I have to respect it. I have to block. I just cannot let that my defense reaction arsenal up. So, I have to kiss the Crippling Crush this turn goodbye. But I'm not going to block with my Crippling Crush this late in the game. I'm actually going to block with 2 other cards and swing for 6 with the Hammer, pitching Crippling Crush on my next turn. I really need to keep that Crippling Crush in my deck. Remember how I said we can't play defensive the whole game? Well, my deck size is so low that now I'm going to have to start maybe taking some damage from my opponent to be able to pull off a meaningful Crippling Crush turn. So even though that's not going to be right now, I'm pitching it for later. Opponent blocks for 4, and I take 1 damage. My opponent takes 2. Okay, so here's an awkward Crippling Crush hand. This is, you know, ideally in a perfect world we would have drawn this hand the previous turn, facing down the Command Conquer, and drawn the better Crippling Crush hand this turn. But that's part of the game, so we're gonna adapt. Maybe cursing our heads a little bit about not getting the perfect Crippling Crush setup. But here we go. We're gonna try to. I'm still trying to get that Crippling Crush turn off, even though I'm not gonna be able to dominate it next turn. I can still afford it. My opponent attacks with a Naked Dawnblade. He uses his boots. I'm happy to see his boots be used on this turn because it's not a high impact way to use them. That's fine. And then, do I pitch this to the bottom? Right, yeah, so I think I pitched this Crippling Crush to the bottom, trying to draw it into a blue, so I'll be able to play a dominated Crippling Crush next turn, have enough resources for it. The downside to that is, remember how I pitched a Crippling Crush last turn? So now there's going to be 2 Crippling Crushes very close to each other, and they're not impactful. However, I did draw the blue that I wanted to. And I'm going to be able to get this Crippling Crush off with Dominate next turn. You know, my opponent's going to get... I'm opting not to respond here. Well, I couldn't even if I wanted to. My opponent's going to get a counter on their Dawn Blade. But you know what? I'm going to get a Dominated Crippling Crush that turn. So you can have a counter on your Dawn Blade. I know there's no defense reaction to Arsenal. This Crippling Crush is going to connect. Unless my opponent blocks with Tunic, or possibly has a high defense shunt in hand, this Crippling Crush effect is going to get off. I'm going to get 2 cards out of his hand at least. So my opponent has 10 cards left in his deck. I have like 8, including my Pitchstone, I probably have 11 left in my deck right now. And the life totals, all things considered, are relatively high, right? With considering how low our deck sizes are. Well, this is where game awareness, experience, and skill come into play because, you know, at this stage of the game, we're playing a very different game than we were playing up until this point. With so few cards in our deck, the game has shifted dramatically to what needs to happen for one of us to close it out. So my opponent only blocks for 2. He's taking a whole 9 damage from the Crippling Crush. He does that because he's not able to block meaningfully. He's not going to be able to prevent that Crippling Crush effect without sacrificing his Tunic. Because if he blocked with his equipment, so real quick I'll explain this. If he had blocked with, to prevent that Crippling Crush that I just threw off that turn, he would have had to block for 2 with the Helm, 2 with the Bracers, 1 with the Tunic, that's blocking 5, and then block another one from hand for 3, making a block of total for 8, and that would prevent the Crippling Crush from getting its on-hit effect. And so my opponent chooses to not sacrifice his Tunic, and instead take the Crippling Crush damage. So interesting choice here. Probably the correct decision. I don't have that much war experience. I know my opponent's very experienced, so I'm not going to question his decision. I'm curious how it would have played out had my opponent sacrificed Tunic in that situation. So unfortunately, I don't get full use out of my Skull Cap over the game because I spend the whole game above life total than my opponent with the 3 Sigil of Solace I play. But I'm still able to block in an impactful way with my Skull Cap that it's not going to lose me the game that I don't get full blocking value out of it. Sometimes it is correct to drop lower. Sometimes it is correct in this matchup to drop lower life than your opponent to get off the most value of your Skull Cap. But in this matchup, I just go for such a defensive role because that's what I'm most experienced and comfortable with. And pitching here, obviously I pitched the last ditch effort to the bottom of the library. Light Strike coming at me for 5 with Go again. So, critical turn right here. Pay attention to this. The whole game I've been playing defensive and blocking and damage and mitigating as much damage as I can. Well, I don't have the cards left to do that in my deck. My deck has so few cards in it that I look at this Crippling Crush in hand and say, I cannot afford to block with this anymore. I have to attack with this. So this turn, you know, we've heard players like Matt Rogers talk about pivoting in a game, right? This is a crucial and textbook example. I block with nothing from my hand. I take 8 damage, probably the most damage I've taken in a single turn up until this point. And I do that to be able to fire off this Crippling Crush in my hand. It's not even going to have Dominate. but I know that the damage is so high that my opponent is it's gonna turn off whatever strong turn they may have on the next turn. So Crippling Crush in for 11. No Dominate. Opponent blocks the offense reaction that we're happy to see out. My opponent blocks for 9, only going to take 2. And here you see me consider pitching Tome of Fiendal on the top, but you know, it's too late in the game. I've already missed the windows. I have so few cards in my deck. I'm not going to be able to get off that Tome of Fiendal this game. I have to accept that. So I actually pitch it to the bottom. So, very interesting situation here. My opponent, after the game, did say that they made a misplay a few turns earlier when they had a Singing Steel Blade that searched for a Razor Reflex. Now, if instead my opponent had searched for Iron Song Response instead of that Razor Reflex, they would have one Razor Reflex left in their deck because they wouldn't have used it, right? Instead, my opponent has Iron Song Response left in hand, and that allows me to block. Or sorry, is that this turn? Okay, sorry. This turn, my opponent used a Razor Reflex, searches from deck. In hindsight, he determined that he actually should have searched for Iron Song Response. And I'll explain to you why in a few turns. So coming in for 8, the on-hit effect, it's not relevant because it has to hit 4 or more, right? And if it hits for 4 or more, my opponent's going to die. So the on-hit effect is not relevant here. But what is relevant? The damage. 8 damage. I'm coming at my opponent for 8 damage. Probably going to get the last of his equipment blocks, or at least several cards from hand. And this is awareness. How I got to this situation is the sum of blocking correctly. And what I mean by blocking correctly is blocking in such a way that you block with the cards that aren't going to have an impact late game. And if you can't afford to, not block with the cards that are going to have an impact late game. So what am I talking about? This turn right here with Cranial Crush. And I did not block with it earlier in the game on purpose because I knew that late game there's going to probably be a window where I'm going to be able to get the attack in for a lot of pressure where my opponent has a backup against the wall. So if you noticed throughout the game, I'm able to get to this point where I can start turning the pressure back on my opponent, go from that defensive to offensive role because I blocked correctly and kept the impactful cards in my deck in hand. Yep, so we're going to see my opponent block for 7, get the last equipment block, or sorry, second to last equipment block. So here, remember when I was talking about that Razor Reflex just now? So if my opponent had opted to search for another offense reaction and kept the Razor Reflex in his deck, this attack right here I would have had to block. You see me actually not block this, which looks very risky, but look at what I'm doing. I'm looking through my opponent's graveyard and I am determining 100% that all the all his offensive reactions are not in his deck or in his hand. He has 1 card in hand, so I'm looking through my opponent's graveyard. I'm making sure 100% that there's nothing that he can do. And since I'm 100%, I can drop down to 1 life. I have this Crippling Crush that's going to end the game. My opponent only has 3 cards left that he'll be able to block with. And I know this Crippling Crush is going to do enough damage that I'm going to be able to end the game. So I drop down to 1. I like that I make a Surging Strike token even on the last turn of the game. Always play efficient. So this Crippling Crush, my opponent can actually block all of this damage and survive and stay at 1 life. But if he does that, he's not going to have any cards in hand and no Tunic up to even swing his Dawnblade. So the game is won at this point. Good game to my opponent. I've gone all the way to decking him out to have no cards left. I have 1 card left in my deck, and we're both at 1 life, so I would say that's a good game. My final thoughts on this game, you know, there was a lot of interesting decisions that I believe were mistakes, like I went over in terms of overblocking. I also did not use my Mage Master boots for my Tome of Fiendal. And for the whole game, I was stuck with that Tome of Fiendal in hand. Obviously, it did not cost me the game, and I used that Tome of Fiendal to at least pitch and get off decent plays. But I think it would have been correct to force my defense reaction out of my arsenal to make room for my Tome of Fiendal earlier, so I've been able to play it. So I go through the whole game without playing my Mage Master boots, and I never got the full block out of my Arcanite Skullcap. I only got 1 block out of it. Sometimes it is correct to drop lower life than your opponent to get off the additional armor block from your Skullcap, but due to how this matchup plays out and my life total lead, I wasn't willing to give that up. So looking back, I probably should have played the Guardian Helm of Eisen's Peak, instead of the Skullcap. You know, hindsight's 2020. There's no way I could have predicted that. And I think that while I made some mistakes, I played correctly more often than I played incorrectly. So that ultimately won me the game. And sometimes that's how a game is won in Flesh and Blood. It's who makes the least amount of mistakes is going to be the winner. I also think that it's interesting going down to totally decking each other. I think overall I played a little too defensively and was risking my own game plan by going this late and having these deck sizes so low. I also just think it's not that cool of a game plan. You know, that's not really how I wanted to win this game, is by totally decking out my opponent. I've beat him successfully before by still using the fatigue strategy, but not totally decking each other. I think it's kind of lame, just in my opinion, to totally deck out. Especially since I wouldn't have been able to play the Last Ditch Effort. I still have 1 Last Ditch Effort in my deck. That's the last card, and then I had 1 in my hand. So if my hand was a little different, I would have been able to pull off a big Last Ditch Effort turn, but obviously I didn't need to. So great game. Shoutouts to FaB Foundry. Thank you for being the platform I can release this video. And shout out to Tower Number 9 for putting together the Discord Ladder League. I recommend for everyone watching this, if they're watching it before, I believe March 2021, that they should participate in the league. It's free and you can play with any schedule because of the time, not constraints, lack of time constraints. So thank you guys. I'm Ruby. This has been a pleasure. I plan on doing more content like this. This is the content that I personally want to see, especially when I'm learning a new class in the game. So expect more of this. Please give me your feedback, drop a comment and a like, and see you next time.